Commander Jake Morrison stood in the transport ship, looking out at the massive space station ahead. Kepler Station was huge, bigger than any human city he had ever seen. The station spun slowly in space, its metal surface gleaming under the light of 3 different suns. This was the Galactic Military Academy, the most important training center in known space. Jake felt nervous, but tried not to show it. He was leading the first group of humans ever accepted into the academy. Behind him, 24 other humans waited quietly. They all wore the same basic uniforms that Earth's military had given them, compared to the fancy gear they had seen on other alien species. Their equipment looked very simple. That Lieutenant Amy Brooks sat near the back of the transport. She was the first human woman to be accepted into the program. Amy had been a fighter pilot on Earth for 8 years. She had fought in 3 different wars and had never lost a battle. But looking at the alien technology around her, she wondered if her experience would mean anything here. The transport docked with a loud clang. The airlock opened with a hiss of air. Jake stepped out first, followed by his team. The corridor was filled with aliens of all shapes and sizes. Some looked almost human, but with different colored skin or strange eyes. Others were completely different, with extra arms or legs that bent in impossible ways. A tall alien with blue skin and forearms approached them. His uniform was covered in medals and badges. "I am General Vextar of the Zephyrian Empire," he said in perfect English. His voice was cold and unfriendly. "You are the humans, I assume." "Yes, sir," Jake replied. "Commander Jake Morrison, Earth Defense Force." General Vextar looked the humans up and down. His expression showed he was not impressed. "Follow me. Try not to get lost." The general led them through long corridors filled with advanced technology. Screens showed star maps and battle plans. Robots moved quietly through the halls carrying equipment. Everything was clean and perfect, like nothing Jake had ever seen on Earth. They entered a large room filled with other cadets. There were at least 200 aliens from different species. Some were huge, standing over 8 feet tall with thick armor-like skin. Others were small and thin with big eyes and pale skin. All of them stopped talking when the humans entered. "These are your fellow cadets," General Vextar said. "They have been training here for months, some for years. You will be starting at the very beginning." An alien with green skin and tentacles for arms pointed at the humans and laughed. "Look at how small they are," he said to his friends. "And they only have 2 arms. How can they fight with just 2 arms?" Other aliens joined in the laughter. They made comments about how primitive humans looked. Some wondered out loud if humans could even understand the training programs. Jake felt his face get hot with anger, but he kept quiet. Captain Ryan Hayes stood next to Jake. Ryan had been a Marine for 12 years. He had seen combat on 4 different planets during Earth's colonial wars. The alien laughter reminded him of his first day in boot camp, when the drill sergeant had made fun of the new recruits. But this felt different. These aliens really believed humans were inferior. General Vextar raised one of his 4 hands for silence. The Galactic Military Academy has trained warriors from 47 different species for over 300 years. Our combat simulators are the most advanced in the galaxy. They were created by the Ethereal Collective, the smartest beings in known space. He walked over to a large machine that looked like a metal pod with wires and lights all over it. "These simulators can create any battle situation you can imagine, from single fighter combat to massive fleet battles involving thousands of ships. The computer inside can think faster than any living being. It knows every fighting style, every weapon, every tactic ever used in galactic warfare." Amy Brooks studied the machine carefully. It did look incredibly advanced. The technology was far beyond anything Earth had. but she had learned not to be impressed by fancy equipment. In her experience, the pilot was more important than the plane. No species has ever achieved more than a 60% success rate. In even our most basic scenarios, General Vextar continued, the average cadet fails their first simulation completely. Most take months to achieve even a 30% success rate. A large alien with gray skin and red eyes spoke up. What is the human success rate in warfare? He asked, genuinely curious. General. Vextar smiled coldly. Humans have no success rate. They have never fought in galactic warfare. Their most advanced conflict was with themselves, using primitive weapons on their own planet. They are here because the Galactic Council decided to give them a chance. I personally voted against it. The room filled with more laughter. Some aliens made jokes about humans fighting with sticks and stones. Others wondered if humans even knew what space combat was like. Jake felt his team getting angry. He could see Ryan's hands forming fists. Amy's jaw was tight with controlled rage. But Jake had been in situations like this before. He knew the best revenge was to prove the doubters wrong. When do we start? Jake asked simply. General Vextar looked surprised by the question. Tomorrow morning. We will begin with the most basic combat simulation. I suggest you get a good night's sleep. You will need it. As the aliens filed out of the room, Jake gathered his team together. Listen up, he said quietly. They think we're primitives. They think we can't fight. Let's show them what humans are really capable of. Amy smiled for the first time since arriving at the station. I can't wait to get into one of those simulators. Ryan nodded. They have no idea what they're dealing with. Jake looked around at his team. Each of them had been chosen for this mission because they were the best fighters Earth had ever produced. They had survived wars that would have destroyed most civilizations. They had learned to fight with limited resources against impossible odds. The aliens thought humans were primitive. Tomorrow, they would learn how wrong they were. The next morning came too quickly for most of the human team. They had spent the night in small rooms that felt more like prison cells than quarters. The beds were hard, and the food from the station's cafeteria tasted like metal. But they had slept worse places and eaten worse food. Jake led his team to the simulator room. It was huge, with 50 of the metal pods arranged in neat rows. Each pod was big enough for one person to lie down inside. Wires and cables ran from each pod to a central computer that hummed with power. General Vextar stood waiting with several other alien instructors. Today you will experience your first combat simulation, he announced. The scenario is simple. You are a fighter pilot defending a space station from enemy attack. You have one ship. The enemy has 5 ships. Your job is to survive for 10 minutes. An alien instructor with purple skin and 3 eyes stepped forward. This is the most basic simulation we have, she said. Most cadets can survive for 2 or 3 minutes on their first try. If you last 5 minutes, you will have done very well for primitives. The other alien cadets gathered around to watch. They whispered among themselves, making bets on how quickly the humans would fail. Some thought the humans might last 1 minute. Others said they would crash their ships immediately. Who wants to go first? General Vextar asked. Lieutenant Colonel Ben Parker stepped forward. Ben had been a test pilot for Earth's experimental fighter program. He had flown ships that were barely safe enough to leave the ground. He had survived crashes that should have killed him. I'll go, he said. Ben climbed into the simulator pod. The lid closed over him with a soft hiss. Inside, he found himself sitting in the cockpit of a sleek fighter ship. The controls were different from Earth ships, but he quickly figured out the basics. The ship responded to his thoughts as much as his hands. The simulation began. Ben's ship was floating near a large space station. Suddenly, 5 enemy fighters appeared on his screen. They moved in perfect formation, their weapons already charging. For attack, Ben did something that surprised everyone watching. Instead of running away or trying to fight all 5 ships at once, he flew straight at them. The alien instructors expected him to use standard evasive maneuvers. Instead, Ben used the space station as cover, drawing the enemy ships into a maze of metal structures. What is he doing? One alien instructor whispered. The enemy ships followed Ben through the station's external framework. Ben knew they would expect him to try to escape. Instead, he suddenly stopped and spun his ship around. The lead enemy ship, flying too fast to stop, crashed into a station support beam and exploded. The remaining 4 ships spread out to surround Ben, but Ben had already moved. He used the explosion from the first ship to mask his movement. By the time the enemy ships realized where he was, Ben had positioned himself behind another support beam. The second enemy ship tried to follow him around the beam. Ben waited until the last second and accelerated straight up. The enemy ship, unable to change direction quickly enough, crashed into the beam just like the first one. 3 enemy ships remained. They had learned from the mistakes of the first 2 and were being more careful, but Ben had learned something too. These ships were programmed to fight using standard tactics. They expected their opponents to follow the same rules. Ben did something no alien cadet had ever tried. He rammed his ship into one of the enemy fighters. Both ships exploded, but the simulation recorded it as a victory for Ben since he had eliminated another enemy. The remaining 2 enemy ships were confused. Their programming had never dealt with a pilot who was willing to sacrifice his own ship to win. They hesitated for just a moment. That was all Ben needed. He used the escape pod from his destroyed ship as a weapon. The pod was small and fast, and the enemy ships didn't see it as a threat. Ben piloted the pod straight into the engine of the 4th enemy ship. The explosion took out both the 4th and 5th enemy ships. The simulation ended. Ben had not only survived the full 10 minutes, he had destroyed all 5 enemy ships. The computer showed his success rate as 97%. The room was completely silent. General Vextar stared at the screen showing Ben's score. "Run the simulation again," he ordered. There must be an error, but there was no error. Ben had really achieved a 97% success rate on his first try. The alien instructors ran diagnostics on the simulator for an hour. Everything was working perfectly. "How is this possible?" the purple-skinned instructor asked. Ben climbed out of the pod. "You said I had to survive for 10 minutes. You didn't say I had to follow your rules." The next human to try was Major Lisa Grant. Lisa had been a Special Forces commander on Earth. She had led ground missions behind enemy lines in 3 different wars. She had never lost a soldier under her command. Lisa's simulation was different. She was commanding a squad of soldiers defending a mountain pass against an army of enemies. The computer said she had 50 soldiers. The enemy had 5,000. The standard tactic was to set up defensive positions and hold out as long as possible. Most cadets could keep 20 or 30 of their soldiers alive for the required time. The best alien cadets might save 40 soldiers. Lisa did something completely different. Instead of defending the pass, she divided her soldiers into small groups and sent them to attack the enemy from all sides. The enemy army was expecting to fight a defensive battle. They were not prepared for 50 small attacks coming from different directions. Lisa's soldiers moved like ghosts through the simulated terrain. They would attack, cause damage, then disappear before the enemy could respond. The enemy army became confused and started shooting at their own soldiers by mistake. By the end of the simulation, Lisa had not only completed the mission, she had destroyed the entire enemy army. Her soldiers had eliminated over 5,000 enemies while losing only 3 of their own men. The computer recorded her success rate as 99%. The alien instructors were starting to panic. They ran more diagnostics. They checked the simulator programming. They even brought in technicians from the Ethereal Collective to examine the machines. Everything was working perfectly. The humans were really achieving impossible scores. Sergeant Danny Walsh went next. Danny had been a sniper in Earth's urban warfare division. He had fought in cities destroyed by war, where every building could hide an enemy. Danny's simulation put him in command of a small outpost surrounded by enemies. The standard strategy was to call for backup and try to hold out until help arrived. Danny looked at the situation and decided help was not coming fast enough. He turned the outpost into a trap. Danny used the base's own equipment to create explosions that looked like enemy attacks. The enemy forces thought they were winning and pressed their attack harder. They ran straight into traps that Danny had set using nothing but standard military equipment. The enemy forces destroyed themselves, trying to capture an outpost that Danny had already abandoned. He had moved his soldiers to safety while the enemy was distracted by the fake battle. When backup finally arrived, they found Danny and his men waiting safely outside the combat zone while the enemy army was completely destroyed. Danny's success rate was 98%. The alien cadets stopped laughing. They stopped making jokes about primitive humans. They watched in silent amazement as human after human achieved scores that should have been impossible. General Vextar called an emergency meeting with the other instructors. "This cannot continue," he said. "The humans are breaking our training system. They are not following any known military doctrine, but the humans were just getting started. They had 21 more people to test, and each one was about to prove that Earth's warriors were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen." By the third day, something strange was happening to the Academy's most advanced simulator. The Nexus Prime was the biggest and most powerful training machine in the galaxy. It had been built by the Ethereal Collective using technology that most species could not even understand. The machine had trained thousands of alien warriors over the centuries. It had never failed, never broken down, never had a single problem. But now, every time a human entered a simulation, the Nexus Prime would slow down, make strange noises, and sometimes stop working completely. Master Technician Zix was the Ethereal, in charge of maintaining the simulators. Zix had 4 brains and could think faster than most computers. He had never seen anything like what was happening to his machines. "The humans are causing cascade failures," Zix reported to General Vextar. "Every time they enter a simulation, the computer tries to predict their actions. But their tactics are so unusual that the computer cannot process them." General Vextar was getting desperate. His superiors were asking questions about why the human test scores were so high. Other alien species were complaining that humans were somehow cheating. "Can you fix it?" he asked. "I do not know," Zix replied honestly. "The computers are trying to learn from the humans, but human warfare makes no sense. They break every rule we have programmed into the system." Major Chris Allen was about to prove just how right Zix was. Chris had been a defense specialist on Earth. He had designed fortifications that could withstand attacks from much larger armies. He was known for turning impossible defensive positions into victory. Chris was given the Academy's most difficult defensive simulation. It was called the Siege of Fortress Prime. The scenario was simple but brutal. Chris commanded a fortress with 1,000 soldiers. The enemy had 50,000 soldiers and siege equipment that could destroy any wall. Every alien cadet who had tried this simulation had failed. The best score ever achieved was lasting 6 hours before the fortress fell. Most cadets lasted less than 2 hours. The simulation was designed to teach cadets about sacrifice and knowing when to retreat. Chris looked at the fortress layout and smiled. He had defended worse positions on Earth with fewer soldiers. But the alien instructors did not know that the simulation began. The enemy army approached the fortress from all sides. Their siege weapons started breaking down the walls immediately. Standard military doctrine said Chris should focus his defenders on the strongest walls and try to hold out as long as possible. Instead, Chris did something that made the Nexus Prime's computer freeze for 30 seconds. He opened all the fortress gates and invited the enemy inside. The alien instructors watching the simulation thought Chris had made a mistake. "The human has lost his mind," one of them said. "He is letting the enemy into his fortress." But Chris had not made a mistake. He had turned his fortress into a giant trap. As the enemy soldiers poured through the gates, they found themselves in narrow corridors filled with obstacles. Chris had used furniture, equipment, and even food supplies to create a maze inside the fortress. The enemy soldiers became separated from each other. They could not use their superior numbers in the narrow spaces. Chris's defenders knew the fortress layout perfectly. They could move quickly through secret passages while the enemy got lost in the maze. The enemy's siege weapons were useless once their own soldiers were inside the fortress. They could not fire at the walls without hitting their own troops. The enemy commanders outside the fortress lost contact with their soldiers inside. Chris turned the fortress into a meat grinder. Enemy soldiers entered through the gates but could not find their way out. They became trapped in rooms where Chris's defenders could pick them off one by one. The simulation was supposed to last 12 hours. After 8 hours, Chris had eliminated 40,000 enemy soldiers while losing only 200 of his own. The remaining enemy forces retreated, declaring the fortress impossible to capture. The Nexus Prime's computer spent 3 hours trying to analyze what had happened. It could not understand how a defensive position had become an offensive weapon. The machine finally gave up and displayed Chris's success rate as 99.7%. Master Technician Zix examined the computer's log files. "The machine is learning tactics it was never programmed to understand," he reported. "It is trying to create new battle scenarios based on human behavior, but the logic makes no sense." The breaking point came when Captain Nicole Davis entered. The Galactic Warfare Mastery Simulation. This was the Academy's ultimate test. It was so complex that teams of experienced officers from multiple species usually worked together for months to complete it. Nicole had been a strategic planner for Earth's combined military forces. She had coordinated battles involving millions of soldiers across multiple continents. She had never lost a campaign. The simulation put Nicole in command of a small fleet, fighting against an enemy force 10 times larger. She had to protect 3 different star systems while managing resources, supply lines, and political complications. The scenario included over 50 different variables that could change at any moment. Nicole studied the situation for 10 minutes. Then she began giving orders that made no sense to the alien instructors watching. Instead of dividing her forces to protect all 3 systems, Nicole concentrated her entire fleet in one location. She ignored 2 of the systems completely, letting the enemy capture them without a fight. The alien instructors thought she had misunderstood the mission, but Nicole had seen something the aliens had missed. The enemy fleet was divided into 3 groups to attack the 3 systems. By concentrating her forces, Nicole could destroy each enemy group one at a time. She attacked the first enemy group with overwhelming force. The enemy was expecting to fight 1/3 of Nicole's fleet. Instead, they faced her entire force. The first enemy group was destroyed in minutes. Nicole then moved to the second system. The enemy group that was not prepared for her arrival. They thought she was busy defending the first system. Nicole's fleet appeared without warning and destroyed the second enemy group before they could react. The third enemy group realized what was happening and tried to retreat. But Nicole had anticipated this. She had positioned some of her ships to block their escape route. The third enemy group was trapped and destroyed. Nicole had not only won the simulation, she had done it in 4 hours. The previous record was 6 months. Her final score showed she had eliminated over 12,000 enemy ships, while losing only 37 of her own. The Nexus Prime's computer could not handle the data. It tried to process Nicole's tactics for 2 hours, then shut down completely. When Master Technician Zix tried to restart it, the machine displayed an error message that had never been seen before: Combat Prediction Matrix Failure. Unable to process warfare patterns, General Vextar called an emergency meeting of all Academy instructors. "The humans have broken our training system," he announced. 3 of our most advanced simulators are no longer functioning. The others are showing signs of similar problems. Reports were coming in from across the galaxy. Every military installation using ethereal simulator technology was experiencing the same problems. The humans had somehow infected the entire galactic military network with their unpredictable fighting methods. "What do we do?" asked the purple-skinned instructor. General Vextar looked tired and defeated. "We call the Ethereal Collective. We need their help to understand what the humans have done to our machines." But deep down, he was beginning to suspect that the problem was not with the machines. The problem was that the galaxy had never encountered warriors like humans before. And now that they had, nothing would ever be the same. The emergency council meeting was held in the Academy's highest security chamber. Representatives from 12 different alien species sat around a circular table made of crystal that glowed with its own light. At the center of the table was a holographic display showing the status of military simulators across the galaxy. The display was mostly red. Red meant broken, offline, or malfunctioning. Out of over 3,000 military training facilities in known space, only 400 were still operating normally. The rest had been shut down after experiencing what the technicians called human pattern failures. Commander Jake Morrison sat at the table as the only human representative. He had been summoned to explain what his species had done to the galaxy's military network. Around him, some of the most powerful beings in the universe looked at him with mixtures of fear, anger, and confusion. The Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic High Command was an ancient ethereal named Quintar. He had lived for over 2,000 years and had seen the rise and fall of entire civilizations. His voice echoed in everyone's mind when he spoke. "Commander Morrison," Quintar began, "your species has been with us for only 1 week. In that time, you have destroyed military technology that took us centuries to develop. Explain this." Jake stood up slowly. He had been expecting this moment since the first simulator had broken down. "With respect, Supreme Chancellor, we have not destroyed anything. We have simply used your training systems the way they were meant to be used." General Vextar slammed one of his 4 hands on the table. "Impossible. No species has ever caused these kinds of problems. Your tactics make no sense. You break every rule of warfare that has existed for thousands of years." "Maybe that's the problem," Jake replied calmly. "You've been following the same rules for thousands of years. We never learned those rules." An alien with silver skin and no eyes spoke up. She was Admiral Teskau of the Void Walkers, one of the galaxy's most feared military forces. "Explain your training methods, human. How do you prepare your warriors for battle?" Jake thought about how to answer. How could he explain human warfare to species that had never experienced it? "On Earth, we have been fighting each other for over 10,000 years. We have never stopped. Every generation has faced wars that threatened to destroy our entire species." The room fell silent. Most alien species had evolved beyond large-scale warfare centuries ago. They fought small conflicts over resources or territory, but nothing like what Jake was describing. While you were developing advanced technology and peaceful societies, Jake continued, we were learning how to kill each other more efficiently. We had to. If we didn't, we would have gone extinct. Supreme Chancellor Quintar leaned forward. You are telling us that your entire species has been in a state of constant warfare for 10 millennia? Not constant, Jake corrected, but frequent. We have had brief periods of peace, but they never last long. We have fought with sticks and stones, swords and shields, guns and bombs, and finally with weapons that could destroy our entire planet. Alien representatives exchanged glances. They were beginning to understand something that terrified them. Every human child learns strategy through games, Jake explained. We teach them to think like generals before they can read. We tell them stories of heroes who won battles against impossible odds. We make movies about warriors who never surrender. Fighting is not just what we do. It is who we are. Admiral, Teska spoke again. What you describe sounds like madness. How has your species survived? Jake smiled grimly. Because we are very good at it. We have learned to fight in every environment, against every kind of enemy, with every possible weapon. We have developed tactics that our enemies could never predict, because we never stop adapting. Major Ben Parker was brought in to demonstrate. The aliens had rebuilt one of the smaller simulators using simpler technology that could handle human tactics. Ben was asked to show the Council what human warfare looked like. The simulation was basic. Ben commanded a single ship against 3 enemy vessels. But instead of fighting them directly, Ben did something that made the alien observers gasp. He used his ship's communication system to broadcast a signal that confused the enemy ship's sensors. They could not tell which ship was real and which were fake images. While they were shooting at illusions, Ben positioned his real ship behind them and destroyed all 3 with a single attack. How did you learn to do that? Asked a reptilian alien with scales that changed color. Video games. Ben replied simply. When I was 12 years old, I played a game where I had to fight enemy ships. I learned that the best way to win was to make the enemy shoot at things that were not there. The alien representatives were shocked. Human children learned advanced military tactics through entertainment. Jake continued his explanation. We do not think like you. You have rules, codes of honor, traditional strategies that have worked for your species for centuries. We have only one rule: win. We will use any tactic, any weapon, any strategy that gives us an advantage. Even if it means sacrificing your own forces? Asked General Vexstar. Especially then, Jake replied. We have learned that sometimes the only way to save many lives is to sacrifice a few. We call it the greater good. Supreme Chancellor Quintar was quiet for a long time. His ancient mind was processing what he had learned. Finally, he spoke. Your species represents a fundamental change in galactic warfare. You fight like prey that learn to hunt. You use desperation as a weapon. You turn weakness into strength. We prefer to think of it as creative problem-solving, Jake said. The question now, Quintar continued, is what to do with this knowledge. Your tactics have broken our training systems because our computers cannot predict chaos. But perhaps that is exactly what we need. Admiral Teska stood up. I propose that we ask the humans to help us rebuild our military training programs. Not to copy their tactics, but to learn how to fight against opponents who do not follow traditional rules. General Vexstar looked horrified. You want to learn from primitives? These primitives, Quintar said slowly, have just proven that. They are the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy. Perhaps it is time we learned from them. The vote was close, but the decision was made. The Galactic High Command would ask humanity to help redesign military training for the entire galaxy. Jake Morrison, The commander who had arrived at the academy 1 week ago as a primitive barbarian was now being asked to teach the galaxy's greatest military minds how to fight. The age of predictable warfare was ending. The age of human military doctrine was about to begin. As Jake left the council chamber, he thought about his team still training at the academy. They had no idea that they were about to become the most important military instructors in galactic history. The kill count instructor was about to be born. 6 months after the great simulator breakdown, Commander Jake Morrison stood in front of a classroom filled with alien military officers. These were not cadets. These were seasoned warriors, generals, and admirals who had commanded fleets and armies across the galaxy. They were here to learn from humans. The irony was not lost on Jake. The same academy that had welcomed humans as charity cases now begged them to share their knowledge. The conference room that had once echoed with laughter at human primitiveness was now silent with respectful attention. Forget everything you know about warfare. Jake began his first lesson. Every rule you have learned, every strategy you have memorized, every tactic you consider honorable or proper, forget all of it. An alien with orange skin and 6 arms raised one hand. But Commander Morrison, our methods have been successful for thousands of years. Why should we abandon proven strategies? Jake smiled. Because your enemies will not abandon theirs. When you fight against humans, or against anyone who has learned to fight like humans, your traditional methods will get you killed. He turned to the holographic display behind him. It showed the results of the last 6 months. Human instructors had been stationed at military academies across the galaxy. The results were shocking. Captain Ryan Hayes has been training Zephyrian officers at the Tau Ceti Academy. Before human instruction, their average combat effectiveness was rated at 6 out of 10. After 3 months of training, it is now 9 out of 10. The display showed battle simulations where alien officers used human tactics. They were devastating. Traditional military formations were crushed by small, flexible units that struck without warning and disappeared before counterattacks could be organized. Lieutenant Amy Brooks has been working with the Void Walker fleet commanders. They have increased their success rate in combat simulations by 300%. They are now considered the most effective fighting force in their sector. General Vexstar, who had once mocked human capabilities, now sat in the front row taking careful notes. His pride had been replaced by desperate hunger for knowledge. His own species was facing rebellions that their traditional military could not handle. Major Ben Parker has established what we call the Adaptive Combat Academy on Kepler Station. His students include former Academy instructors who once considered themselves superior to human warriors. The display showed Ben's classroom. Alien. Officers were learning to pilot fighters using human methods. They were taught to think like predators, to use their environment as a weapon, to turn every disadvantage into an advantage. The key to human warfare, Jake explained, is that we never fight fair. We do not believe in equal combat. We believe in overwhelming our enemies so completely that they cannot recover. A reptilian alien with glowing eyes spoke up. But what? About honor? What about the rules of war? Jake's expression became serious. Honor is a luxury for species that have time to think about it. On Earth, we learned that dead heroes do not protect their families. We fight to win, not to look good doing it. He switched the display to show human military history. The aliens saw images of battles where small human forces had defeated much larger armies. They saw tactics that involved deception, misdirection, and the willingness to sacrifice anything to achieve victory. We have a saying on Earth, Jake continued. All warfare is based on deception. If you can make your enemy think you are weak when you are strong, or strong when you are weak, you can control the battle. Lieutenant Amy Brooks entered the classroom carrying a small device. She had been working with the engineering department to create new training tools. "This is our latest development," Amy announced. "We call it the Chaos Simulator. Unlike the old simulators that followed predictable patterns, this one learns and adapts during combat. It studies your tactics and develops counters in real time." The alien officers looked interested but worried. They had heard stories about the old simulators that had broken down trying to process human tactics. "The difference," Amy explained, "is that this simulator was designed by humans. It expects chaos. It thrives on unpredictability. It will teach you to fight against opponents who do not follow your rules." Colonel Sarah Murphy walked in with a group of alien cadets. These were the first graduates of the new program. They moved differently than other aliens. They were alert, constantly scanning their environment, ready to fight at any moment. "These cadets have completed 6 months of human military training," Sarah announced. "They have learned to think like apex predators. They have been taught to use their natural abilities in ways their species never imagined." One of the cadets was a small alien with thin arms and pale skin. His species was known for being physically weak and avoiding combat. But something in his eyes had changed. He looked dangerous. "Cadet Nix Tell," Sarah called out. "Tell the class what you learned about using your natural abilities." Nix Tell stepped forward. "I learned that being small and weak can be advantages if you use them correctly. I can hide in places larger warriors cannot reach. I can move through enemy positions without being noticed. I can strike at vital targets while my enemies are looking for bigger threats." The other alien officers stared at him. This was not the same species they knew. Human training had transformed him into something completely different. "The final examination for our program," Jake announced, "is a simulation that is never the same twice. It adapts to each student, creating scenarios that push them beyond their breaking point. It is based on human military history, where victory was always achieved against impossible odds." He brought up the final display. It showed graduation statistics from the new program. The numbers were incredible. 87% of our graduates achieve scores that would have been impossible under the old system. They are not just better fighters. They are completely different kinds of warriors. Jake looked around the room at the faces watching him. Some showed fear, others excitement, but all showed respect. The galaxy had learned to take humans seriously. "But the most important thing we teach," Jake continued, "is adaptability. Human warfare is not about memorizing tactics. It is about learning to create new tactics when the old ones stop working." Sergeant Danny Walsh entered the room carrying reports from across the galaxy. "We just received word from the Outer Rim. Conflicts," he announced. "The Rebel Alliance has been using traditional tactics against Imperial forces for 3 years, with limited success. Last month, they started using human-trained advisors." Danny activated a new display showing recent battle reports. "In 30 days, they have achieved more victories than in the previous 3 years combined. The Imperial forces cannot adapt to human-style warfare fast enough." An alien general with metallic skin stood up. "This is creating an arms race," he said worriedly. "Every faction in the galaxy will want human military advisors. Wars that have been stable for decades are suddenly shifting." "That is the point," Jake replied. "The old ways of fighting created stalemates that lasted for generations. Millions of beings died in slow, grinding conflicts that never ended. Human warfare ends conflicts quickly, one way or another." Captain Ryan Hayes returned from the simulator room with his latest class of graduates. These were experienced ship captains who had commanded vessels for decades. But now they moved with the confidence of apex predators. "My students have learned something their species never taught them," Ryan announced. "They have learned to be ruthless. Not cruel, but ruthless. They understand that mercy during battle gets everyone killed. You show mercy after you have won. One of the graduates, a tall alien with blue skin and silver eyes, stepped forward. I commanded a heavy cruiser for 15 years, he said. I thought I knew everything about space combat. Human training taught me that I knew nothing. I have learned to use my ship as a weapon in ways I never imagined. Jake nodded approvingly. That is exactly the transformation we want to see. You are no longer thinking like prey, hoping to survive. You are thinking like hunters seeking victory. The classroom door opened, and Supreme Chancellor Quintar entered. The ancient ethereal rarely left his chambers, and his presence made everyone stand at attention. At ease, Quintar said, his voice echoing in their minds. I have come to see the results of our new program personally. Jake stepped forward. Supreme Chancellor, our graduates are exceeding all expectations. We have trained over 2,000 officers from 43 different species. They are transforming military operations across the galaxy. I have read the reports, Quintar replied. But I want to understand something. What makes human warfare so different? What is the source of your effectiveness? Jake thought carefully about his answer. We learned to fight against ourselves. Every tactic we developed had to work against opponents who thought like us. We could not rely on our enemies being predictable, because they were just as creative and desperate as we were. And this made you stronger? It made us adaptive. When you fight against unpredictable enemies for 10,000 years, you learn that the only constant is change. You develop the ability to create new solutions instantly when old solutions fail. Quintar nodded slowly. You have given the galaxy a great gift, Commander Morrison, but also a great responsibility. This knowledge will change the balance of power everywhere. We understand that, Jake replied.